Hello, and welcome to this quick guide of how to play Augmentation Evoker in Mythic Plus with ease. Now keep in mind, this is a quick guide to get you playing and get you in keys quickly. I won't be covering all the intricacies, and there's certain changes that you might want to make to go deeper in your gameplay, which I won't cover in this video, perhaps another one. This is a quick guide, so let's get started. Taking a look at our talent trees, the class tree as normal is kind of flavor. There's a couple things that we don't really necessarily need or want, but Leaping Flames is a big help for this build. Our augmentation tree, however, a lot of these talents, if you follow these, are kind of set and forget it. There are things that you might want to change later on, but just to get started, Interwoven Threads simply just reduces the cooldowns instead of having to play with time skip, for example. But this is a tree that will get you started and get you going. Talking about stats, Intellect is king with Mastery close behind. Haste and Crit and Verse are kind of meh, to be honest. Mastery will give you more buffs and longer buffs, so that's really all you want on your gear. Trinkets that increase your intellect, so the Iridius Fragment, for example, are very strong as it increases your intellect, which also increases your buffs to your teammates. Speaking of buffs, let's start with the simplest part of augmentation in Mythic Plus. You want to cast Prescience on cooldown. Since there's only 2 other DPSs and Prescience always prefers damage dealers over healers and tanks, you don't even have to choose your target. Just cast this on cooldown and both your other 2 damage dealers should have it up basically all the time. This is the simplest part and you should always cast it on cooldown. Similarly, Blistering Scales should be up on your tank at all times, or at least you should cast it on cooldown. An easy way to make this just a button that you press whenever it's off cooldown is making this focus macro. All you have to do is /focus on your tank, and this macro will make sure Blistering Scales always goes on your tank. Now for your actual rotation, the only real priority you have is your uptime on your Ebon Might. You want it to be up as much as possible during pulls when you're in combat, and the way to extend it is with Upheaval, Breath of Eons, Fire Breath, and Eruption. Starting with the big cooldown, Breath of Eons, which should only really be used when your other damage dealers have cooldowns, because it deals a portion of the damage that they do. And if you don't really have time or know how to or want to track your friends or your teammates' CDs, a surefire way to do it is pop it on big pulls, on Bloodlust, or at the beginning of a boss fight, especially on Tyrannical. That's something that you'll learn as you grow, but basically pop it when your friends have CDs if possible, if not on big pulls or on Bloodlust. Now for your priorities during Ebon Might uptime, it's going to be Upheaval first, Fire Breath second, and Eruption third. The reason for this is that Upheaval gets its cooldown reduced by each Eruption cast. This means that you don't really want to cast Eruption if Upheaval is off cooldown. Always cast Upheaval when it's available so you don't lose that cooldown reduction. Fire Breath is just a long CD, so you want to get it out. It's not as crucial. You really want to get it off as soon as possible, but if you happen to cast an Eruption while Fire Breath is off cooldown, it's not the big deal, but you don't want to do that with Upheaval. Continuing on this, Upheaval and Fire Breath, your Empower abilities. Upheaval, you really only need to empower it as much to hit all your enemies. It doesn't deal more damage, it just increases the circle, the radius of your circle. Usually, second level, maybe even first sometimes, is enough to hit all your targets. You'll learn this as you go, but just watch. Sometimes they might spread out, so you might have to actually empower it further. Fire Breath is interesting. We don't really need it on our targets to increase our damage in any other way, so there's not really a downside to empowering it all the way. It might actually be beneficial since you'll get more charges of Leaping Flames, which means that your Fire Breath will go to more targets. That is beneficial because it can give you Essence Burst, which will give you free eruptions, which means a cooldown reduction on Upheaval, and when you consume Essence Burst, it also increases your intellect by 5 or up to 10%, which is really all you want to do. You want to have as much intellect as possible. And really, that's all there is to it. When you don't have enough essence to cast Eruption, you'll want to be casting Living Flame so that you could either get a proc, so you get Essence Burst, or just waiting, you have nothing else to cast. But Upheaval, Fire Breath, Eruption, sometimes Breath of Eons when it's time to really have a big pack or burst down with your friends. And as far as basics go, that's really it. You're gonna have to play around with those 3 abilities to learn how to get the most out of your Ebon Might. Prescience can proc Essence Burst, so there's intricacies that you want to learn how to best use those Essence Bursts, how best use your Essence, and sometimes you might not want to cast Ebon Might if there's like 10% left on mobs, but rather save that until the next pack, or save your essences to next pack. But in the basic part, that's it. You don't have to play a lot more than that. It's just Ebon Might, keeping up Upheaval, Fire Breath, and Eruption. Now, Augmentation also brings a lot of utility, which is good for you to be aware of. When there's a lot of damage, your Obsidian Scales basically gives your entire group a rally, just a huge boost to stamina, to health. So when there's a lot of damage incoming, it's worth popping that. We have Zephyr, obviously. With Hover, we also give everyone a huge movement speed increase. That's worth using between pulls, or sometimes if you really need to move during a pull. Do try to remember to switch back to Black Attunement, because when you cast Hover, it'll switch over to Bronze Attunement, which is fine, but really you want more maximum health. And it'll automatically switch to that as you do Obsidian Scales. With 2 charges, you can have a lot of uptime. You have a lot of rally all the time. It's really strong, so just make sure you know about that. All right, so let's give this rotation a try. Before pull, I would cast Prescience and Blistering Scales. Make sure I have that up. As we pull, I'd cast Ebon Might, Upheaval, probably empower my Fire Breath, and then start casting Eruption. Prescience when it's off cooldown, go ahead Eruption, keep casting Eruption. This is really most of what you're gonna see. You're gonna see my Living Flame switching off. I got an Essence Burst there, which is good. I get another little bit more uptime here. I didn't play very well here. If I could have played better, I could probably continue there, but my Ebon Might is back up. I might have stopped anyway, just to keep getting Essence. Cast Ebon Might again. We're back at it again. Oh, I cast Upheaval, Interruption. Probably charge this. Depending on how many targets there are, you want to make sure there's no point in necessarily getting too many Living Flames, but it's good for that Essence Burst. If there's a big pack where I see my friends popping a cooldown, I'd probably, because I have Iridius Fragment, I would make sure, first of all, that I have Ebon Might up. There's no point in casting any of those CDs if you don't have Ebon Might up. So I'd cast Ebon Might. I'd probably go in with a Breath of Eons into Upheaval, into Fire Breath, into Iridius Fragment. Probably a little bit earlier. I would have cast Iridius Fragment as soon as I cast Breath of Eons there, and then just back into it again. The only difference on a big burst pull is really that you want to cast Breath of Eons, Iridius Fragment, Pot if you have it. Basically main stat, primary stat is what you want to use. And that's really it. It's a bit of a dance until you get to learn how to just continuously cast Prescience on cooldown, and make sure you don't, cast unnecessary Eruptions or Upheavals or Fire Breaths. There's no reason to cast any of those spells unless you have Ebon Might up. No reason. Your damage is more or less negligible, so just cast Living Flame, maybe even Off Heal if that's worth it, just to start getting those Essence Bursts, because you want them for your Ebon Might window. So if you play a little, sometimes it feels bad because you might have to move or something and your Ebon Might rolls out really quickly. You still have like 6 Essence and you don't really know what to do with it. You can cast off a couple of Eruptions if you know that you're not going to have Ebon Might up until you have full Essence again. And if you do know that you're going to get more Essence Burst, that's worth it. But really, a lot of things are just worth keeping until your Ebon Might window. And that's about it for this quick guide on how to play Augmentation Evoker in Mythic Plus. Hey, you just watched a Warcraft video with Ease. Good on you. Until next time, take care.